You're listening to the Mind Over Finger podcast, episode number 69.
Welcome to the Mind Over Finger podcast, discussions on mindful music making, efficient practice, and building a purposeful career. And now, your host, Dr. Renee Paul Gauthier.
Hi everyone, I hope you're doing great and that this episode finds you healthy and happy. This week is a very special episode for me because I'm speaking with violinist and pedagogue Simon Fischer, whose work I've used and admired for years and whom I consider to be a giant in the violin pedagogy world. Simon is recognized worldwide as a performer, educator, and recording artist. As a recitalist, he's performed in the UK, the USA, Europe, and Australia, and he's frequently played as soloist or leader with major orchestras throughout the UK. He's a professor at the Guildhall School of Music, and he's also held positions at the Yehudi Menuhin, Wells Cathedral, and Purcell Music Schools, in addition to being a visiting professor at the Royal Scottish Academy of Music for 15 years. Simon's published work greatly influences the teaching of the violin. He wrote for the Strad magazine from 1991 to 2014, and his monthly articles attracted a worldwide following. Published by Edition Peters, his technique books, Basics in Practice, Scales, and the Violin Lesson, as well as his DVD, The Secrets of Tone Productions, have become standards amongst violinists. His book and DVD, Warming Up, were described by the Strad magazine as 23 pages of pure technical gold. In 2014, Simon was awarded the European String Teachers Association Prize in celebration of a lifetime contribution to string teaching. In conjunction with his playing engagements, he frequently gives masterclasses and workshops across the world. It's such a great honor for me to have this opportunity to bring you a conversation with Simon Fischer. Simon talks to us in details about the fundamentals of high-quality practice and performance preparation, but I can't even begin to describe eloquently enough the amount of profound wisdom you'll find in today's episode. Therefore, without further ado, here's my discussion with Simon Fischer. Let's go to the show. Simon Fischer, it's an incredible honor to have you on the podcast today.
Very much. An honor to be invited. Thank you.
Simon, I've been a fan for ages and I cannot think of a string player who wouldn't know who you are. But for the other musicians who listen to the podcast who might not be familiar with you and your work, can you tell us a little bit about you, how you got to where you are, and how this artistic path has unfolded?
How did I get to where I am? Very, very hard to put that in a nutshell. Basically, I've spent my life trying to do three things all at the same time. One is playing the violin, performing. The other, of course, is teaching, and then on top of that, writing. And in a way, I've had three full-time careers running all at the same time, in the amount of playing I've done, the amount of teaching I've done, and the amount of writing I've done. Any one of those things would actually have been enough. But it's all been connected. It's amazing how much you learn through teaching, and if you want to develop your own playing endlessly, the easiest thing is to look at the students you're working with and recognize elements in your own playing that you can see in theirs, elements that shouldn't be there, that is. So teaching and playing have always been like two sides of the same coin to me, and practicing, of course, is self-teaching. And then the writing about it. That's just come from really wanting to be organized and not lose anything along the way. As for, I look through my own books and I get ideas like, oh yeah, that'd be a really good way to practice. I'm glad to remember that, reading it here. And if it hadn't been written down, of course, maybe it would be completely forgotten. Maybe it would still exist on a subliminal level, but who knows? But what I'm always thinking of is the great cellist Pablo Casals, who apparently had an adult amateur student who wasn't very good. And a friend of Casals said to him one day, Pablo, you can teach anyone in the world. Why do you teach this man? And Casals replied, because it's from him that I learn how to teach the good ones.
Mm.
So what does that mean? It means that as you get better and better and better at playing the violin or the cello or whatever, all the same problems are there as exist for a beginner. But they just get smaller and smaller and smaller until nobody notices them. But that's because you're dealing with them and they become so minuscule, nobody can tell. If you listen to Heifetz, especially at half speed, he didn't play every note in tune. So anyway, you're dealing with an adult amateur, not very good cellist as Casals was doing, and all the problems are huge. You see them like mountains, and then the next student comes along and they're an incredibly fine player. But now you see a tiny microscopic version of that mountain in the previous person, and you wouldn't have spotted it if you hadn't seen the ridiculous huge version of it. So it's in that way that do my students learn more or do I learn more? I have no idea. It's at least equal.
Hmm. I feel like there's so much wisdom encompassed in what you just shared with us.
Well, it's an endless path, and learning to play, and we need to get all the help we can from everywhere. But in terms of the working with the students, the other thing that happens is that I notice something in a student, in one student, and then I start noticing it in all of them. And sometimes I then start noticing whatever it is in me. There's an interesting example a couple of weeks ago with a student playing the Beethoven A minor, yum, pa 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 pum, and she played dee 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 dee, with an absolutely equal bow speed. And of course, it can't be equal. I can't really say what it should be, but it can't be equal. Maybe it's slower and accelerating, and then the down bow. If you divide a note like that into, say, 4, you think 1, 2, 3, 4. No, let's do 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That 1, 2, 3, 4 is going to be more than half the bow, and then 5, 6, much less bow, and then 7, 8, a tiny amount of bow. So of course the bow is slowing. This sounds obvious, but she played one bow speed, one bow speed. So there's a little problem in this, which is, or a conundrum, which is that when we do the tone exercises, and for instance, play one note, whole bows on different sound points, of course, we're working to get the stroke absolutely even speed, even pressure, even distance from the bridge. And but you can't play music like that. So it's why do the tone exercise then? Well, because it's the basis of control. But then you must be a musician and you must listen and everything changes then as a result of musical listening. But anyway, the point is, having seen this even bow speed in this student, suddenly I'm seeing it in all the students, and it's an enlargement of my understanding. Maybe I should have had the understanding before. I don't know. A similar thing happened in about the year 2000 for me, when actually I was on holiday in Manhattan and went into a fabulous secondhand bookshop on Broadway. It was around the 80s somewhere. And I found the Isaac Stern autobiography, My Last 79 Years. Wonderful book. I love reading books like that. I can't put them down. I read them from cover to cover, like a cheap novel where you just have to turn the next page and see what's there. And boy, if anybody wants a great read, I've just finished reading From Russia to the West, the musical memoirs and reminiscences of Nathan Milstein. Absolutely fabulous. It's out of print, of course, but you can get it online. So anyway, I bought my first 79 Years by Isaac Stern and loved it. But I thought, well, I don't really know his playing that well. I want to get to know it. I actually grew up listening to the Schubert String Quintet, the wonderful performance with Tortelier and Casals and Isaac Stern and Milton Katians. Who was the second violin? Schneiderhan, was it? Schneider. And my parents used to bring a loudspeaker into my bedroom if I couldn't sleep when I was 7, 8 years old, and it was always the Schubert Quintet they put on. So I've known Isaac Stern's recorded playing all my life, but not much of it. So I got myself some recordings and started listening. And I kept thinking he played sharp. Not sure if I should say this out loud in public like this, but not everything. He's a wonderful violinist, and he could play Schubert. You know, not everyone can play Schubert. Everyone can play the notes of Schubert, but not everybody can make those notes sound like Schubert. And Isaac Stern could. So I thought he was constantly playing sharp in third position, fourth position. I couldn't understand it until I finally realized, you know what he's doing? He's fingering the same spacing in third position as in first position. That's why he's playing sharp. I couldn't believe it. But you know, in those days, when you're a big player like that and you were going to record, I don't know, Tchaikovsky melody, I don't know that you practiced it that much before you went into the studio, and especially if you were Stern. He didn't like practicing that much. He said in his autobiography, because he was always partying and having a good time, and he said in his autobiography, so I played a few bum notes. So what? Well, I don't know. I think there's a lot to be said about that. First comes the performance and then the party, not the other way around. But not for me to say. But anyway, all I thought was he hadn't practiced. He hadn't practiced. Like if somebody gave me the opportunity to record the Tchaikovsky melody, I'd put my life into it in preparing it. But I guess when you've got as many opportunities as Stern had, maybe you don't. Anyway, whatever the case, and I don't want to sound like I'm being critical of him, because marvelous musician, marvelous violinist. Anyway, the point is, next thing you know, I'm hearing all of my students doing the same thing. And I'm thinking, playing sharp in third and fourth position because they're still fingering as though they're in the lower position. And it's like, oh, so that's why they're playing out of tune. You know, there's always a reason why. If you play a note out of tune, there's always a reason why. And so that became the big theme. But guess what the next stage was? I noticed I was doing it. Of course, I was playing sharp as well for those. Oh, so that's why that note's sharp, and I would have to correct it. I knew how to correct my intonation, but I didn't know why it was out in the first place. You understand there's a difference there. So anyway, teaching and practicing, improving a student, improving yourself, it's two sides of the same coin. If you're a player, I guess not so much, but you must be, if you're not a player, but you must still be learning from your students, and your knowledge is increasing the whole time.
Absolutely. I feel like I've learned so much as a performer since I started teaching.
Well, exactly.
And, you know, it's been so hard for me to think of questions to ask you because, well, you're Simon Fisher. I have way too many questions for you. And, you know, like, what's one or two questions that one should ask Simon Fisher? So, if that's okay with you, I'd like to actually just let you have the mic and talk to us a little bit about what you think is important about practicing.
Well, that's like saying, how do you practice? Is it?
Hmm. Please tell us how you practice.
Well, that question to me is a bit like the question, how should you hold the bow? And I think there's only one correct answer to that question, which is another question,
Mhm.
which is, well, to play what? What do you mean? What's the right way to hold the bow? To play what? And where in the bow?
Mhm.
You know, for instance, if you think of Galamian, he was very clever. He talked about spreading the fingers for more leverage in big playing, but for what he called the transparent sound, or something less intense, your fingers can be less strong on the bow and not so far apart. Or you think of the bow hold, when you're at the frog, your bow hold is different in relation to the bow to how it is when you play at the point. But that difference doesn't happen suddenly. You don't have your frog bow hold, frog bow hold, frog bow hold, suddenly point bow hold. Of course, it's a gradual transition all the way. And that means every single part of the bow has a different bow hold. In fact, if you look at the hand in relation to the bow,
Mhm.
and then the bow hold for spiccato, the bow where the fingers might be more upright, bow hold for martele, where perhaps you're more pronated, etc., etc. So, how should you hold the bow? Depends what you're playing. And how should you practice? Well, that just depends on so many things.
Mhm.
Um, One thing that I've found as I've um, not got older but stopped being young, I think, is to stop um, that feeling of I must go and practice,
Mm.
but I can't face it, but I must, but I can't face it, and you put it off, and you know, whatever, that whole scenario. Um, the answer to that is, what type of practice can't you face? For example, if I'm pretty tired and I've had a busy day and I've got to spend the evening working on whatever it is, piece, concerto, whatever, and I think to myself, I must go upstairs and get the violin out and work every single measure, the beginning and the middle and the end of it, for this or that or that, or you know, troubleshoot through for this or that or the other. And I think, oh God, I can't face it. But what about if I think, I'm going to go upstairs and play through from beginning to end, and then I'm going to put it down and come downstairs again? It's like, yep, I can do that.
Mhm.
So in my case, I've always been, I found a fantastic quote from one of your American presidents. Was it Abraham Lincoln? But he said, and I can never remember the hours either. Was it 8 hours or 6 hours? But he said it was something like, if he was given 8 hours to chop down a tree, he'd spend the first 6 hours sharpening his axe.
Mhm.
And when I first came across that, I nearly jumped up and down for joy because that's how I've always been. So in the old days, when I was, something like you've got the opportunity to play a concerto, I don't know, Brahms concerto or something. In my case, I didn't have that many opportunities and even fewer today, but I did occasionally have the chance to play a concerto like that. But I never wanted to practice it as such. And a typical day for me leading up to, well, in not leading up to a performance, that's a different thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's when you're playing. But in the working on it, building it stage of a piece, all I ever wanted to do was, well, I'll start with some intonation exercises. I've got all day to practice. I've got to practice the Brahms concerto. Well, let's start with some intonation exercises, because if I can get my whole hand in tune, then there'll be much less to worry about when I actually work on the Brahms later on. So I'll just get my hand really tuned up for an hour later, and then you have a break and all, and then you come back and, well, I should practice the Brahms, but actually I'd love to do those tone exercises because I sound so terrific at the end of doing them that every note in the Brahms will be so much better, and I'll be more in control and everything. So, hour and a half later, I finished getting entranced by making the string vibrate and doing all those things, and then you have your break, or you're having something to eat or something, and then you think, I really got to practice that Brahms. So you go back to the violin. But then I would think, if I practice all the shifts, I mean, you go one da dee 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 dee, etc., and dee da da dee 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 dee, etc. And you do that with every finger combination. Well, then you practiced every shift you could possibly come up against in the Brahms, and then when I practice the Brahms, it'll be all so much accurate and easier, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And it always ended up that it would be 10 o'clock at night, and I'd end up doing half an hour or 40 minutes on the Brahms concerto itself. I mean, this might sound possibly arrogant if I say I'm a very good musician, but I don't think it's so arrogant, because I think most of us are very good musicians. We're always better musicians than we are players, because the music happens inside us, and we can picture it, and we hear how we want it to be and everything. Doing it's another thing. I've never thought I needed to work on, I know how I want to play the Brahms concerto. I know how I want to hear it played. I know what I don't like when I hear it, and I know what I like when I hear it. And when you play yourself, you know what you don't like, and you know what you want, etc. But the problem is to play absolutely in tune and to be absolutely in control. So I always liked to practice like that. So then, how should you practice? Well, if you're me, you really like, sometimes, and especially in the past, I mean, not today, I have to admit, but I would spend a whole 4 hours doing tone production exercises. I'd spend a whole day doing shifting exercises. And boy, do you feel it for days and weeks to come when you work like that. The same today, I love demonstrating little exercises to students. So there's so little opportunity to do it. There's so little time to work like that these days. One's always having to teach them, help them with their repertoire for exams and all of that. But if I demonstrate a tapping exercise to a student, I feel that 3, 4, 5, 6 days later, and I'll be playing the fiddle and thinking, my left hand feels terrific. I wonder why that is. And you think, oh yeah, it was all that tapping I was doing with so and so the other day. Of course, it feels terrific. So if you're me, you're greedy.
Mm-hmm.
You do a certain amount of work like that and you feel great. But then you get greedy and you just want more of it. So you do more of it. It's not about being disciplined. It's not about, oh, well, I'm such a good practicer. I can spend hours practicing just tone or just intonation or just finger action. It's nothing to do with discipline. It's sort of greediness because you feel so good afterwards and you want to be like that.
Absolutely. I have a similar example actually using some of your exercises where
Okay.
I remember one summer I was preparing for yet another audition and I was you can only play those excerpts so many times before you get absolutely bored.
Exactly.
I decided to do exactly what you're talking about, and at that time I had just purchased Warming Up,
Oh, great.
which is one of my favorite book. I love this book so much.
Oh, great. Thank you so much.
And even just the first exercise, after doing that for a few weeks, I could feel such a huge difference in my left hand. The first and second exercises with all of the tapping and the left hand PIDs.
The tapping and holding down and stuff.
Yes, and the second exercise with the stretching of the left hand and all of these wonderful things. And I spent most of my time on technique, a lot of it actually using that book. And then I would spend maybe just the last hour or so looking at the audition repertoire. And it made preparing for this audition so much fun. And I ended up doing really well, which was great. But I really agree with you when it comes to spending time on sharpening the saw. I could not agree more.
Just one thing there, you said after a few weeks, I don't want you to put people off here. What I'm into is a sort of impatience that we should have. And what I mean is, I want instant results.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody says to me, do this or that or the other, and after 3 months or 6 months, you'll be really pleased you did. Sorry, I'm not going to do it. I'm sorry. The maximum time I give something before I need to witness a clear, tangible result is 15 or 20 seconds.
Mm.
Sorry, after that, I'm getting fed up. And so that first exercise you mentioned in the warming up book, is it 30 seconds you're meant to do each one? So it's a total of 2 minutes.
Correct. Yes.
Right. And so if you do it once, which means you've done all 4 fingers, at the end of doing it once, so after 2 minutes, I want to feel a result.
Mm-hmm.
So, but then of course you do it again and again and again, and after weeks, sure. But you take my point.
Yes. No, I totally agree with you. When you do this exercise right after, the left hand already feels so much more settled
Exactly.
and more stable.
I sometimes worry about myself, this propensity to enjoy technical work. I mean, I have to say I've never had a student who's worked in the way that I have. I mean, it's one thing. I mean, for instance, the tone exercises. I was saying to somebody only this evening, no, it wasn't the tone exercises, it was some vibrato exercises. I was saying how, and again, they're in the warming up book or the second page of vibrato in the warming up book. That was my favorite exercise
Mm-hmm.
for about 3 years. And I did it every day, I did it constantly because there's a simple formula which I've always applied to everything. For instance, good violinist can vibrate at any speed. I want to be a good violinist. Therefore, I must be able to vibrate at any speed. I mean, it's just obvious. It's not a dog has hair, I have hair, therefore I'm a dog. A famous example of false logic, as used to be taught in schools when they taught logic. But good violinist has fabulous trills. I haven't got fabulous trills, but I want to be a good violinist. Therefore, I must work on my trills and get them fabulous. It's just so obvious what we have to do. And but what I was saying to this poor student this evening was, my problem as a teacher is to find the sort of students who will do something like that every day for 3 years. Because if you're lucky, you'll get them to do the exercise once on one occasion. Never mind really fly with it. The same, of course, applies to the tone exercises. But I remember when I was shown the first of those by the then assistant to Dorothy DeLay, Masao Kawasaki, a wonderful teacher. He showed me the basic tone exercises in one lesson, and then they were never mentioned again until we all went to Aspen at the end of the year. And in my first lesson with him in Aspen, he said, "Can I check the sound point exercises?" Not a word had been said in between. But okay, so I was 23 years old. I was a postgraduate student. I was desperate to make the most of my opportunity. It's not the same as being a spaced out teenager or equally a spaced out college student. You know, with college students, you often have to wait until the third and the fourth year before you can really do decent work with them because their head's spinning all over the place the rest of the time. So anyway, so I was 23 and I was postgraduate, etc., etc. But the fact is, I practiced those tone exercises for an hour or two every single day between that first lesson with Mr. Kawasaki and when he next asked to hear them in Aspen. But find me a student who will work like that. I think I might have had 5 or 10 in my entire career. So, you know, the disappointment is it doesn't matter what you know and what you can give. It depends on the recipient as to how successful that's going to be. But anyway, when I say I'm sometimes worried about myself with my propensity to enjoy doing these things, I've sometimes wondered, is it because when I work on technique, I'm kind of working on the violinist I'm going to become in the future? But when I work on repertoire, I'm dealing with the violinist that I am today, which is never as pleasant a prospect for some reason. But anyway, as I say, that's at early stages of preparation. Later stages, what you've got to do is play as a musician. The worst thing is if you practice practicing.
Right.
You know, my practice book is what's it called? 250 practice methods or whatever for the violin. And I often joke to people that of those 250, actually all you need are number 1, number 249, and 250. And you can forget everything in between. As has been pointed out to me, that's kind of ridiculous because the point is, I know all the other ones very, very well because I put them down on paper. And so when I practice, I mean, if you think of a number of a practice method in that book, in supposing I'm working on breaking down some difficult passage or mastering something I can't play, I'll do practice method number 49 for 10 seconds, and then 39 for 5 seconds, and then 52 for 3 seconds, and then 125 for 2 whole minutes, and then etc. So what you're doing is you're darting around from approach to approach in rapid succession. It's not a matter of doing number 49 for an hour. You know, so I know all that stuff, and that is in fact how I practice when I'm working things out. But what are number 1, number 249 and 250? Number 1 in the practice book is playing slowly. So I'm very proud that I asked Dorothy DeLay a particular question, and she said, that she asked Galamian exactly that same question. I was proud to ask the same question, you see, or whatever. The question was, if you could choose only one practice method out of all the ways you know to practice, which would you choose? He asked Galamian that, and Galamian's answer was playing through at half speed because it gives you time to think.
Mm-hmm.
So playing slowly. I'm forever asking students, and in masterclasses, everything, anywhere, why is it good to practice slowly? There's only one answer I'm prepared to accept. Of course, the answer is because it gives you time to think. So then what's 249 is playing through from beginning to end. Now, I learned this from somebody telling me about listening to Pellman doing a question and answer session at some event, I don't know what. And somebody asked him, how do you go about learning a piece for the first time? So, you know what Pellman is like. He likes to do kind of, he's funny and he messes around. He makes everybody laugh and it's great. So he put on this whole song and dance routine in answering the question and said, well, the first thing I do is I play through from beginning to end. And then I'll probably play through from beginning to end a few times. And then I always finish up by playing through from beginning to end. And everybody's already laughing. And so he says, and then the next day, there's always a particular thing I always do first. I play through from beginning to end. And then I play through from beginning to end a few times. And then I finish by playing through from beginning to end. And so he goes on. And then he says, after a few days, I have to admit to myself that this passage on the first page, it's still scratchy. This passage at the bottom of the second page, I still need to find a good fingering. This passage on the third page, it's still out of tune every time I get there, it's out of tune. So he does what he said, it's like spot cleaning clothes before you take them to the laundry.
Mm.
So on the first page, he'll do some work on that passage, stop it being so scratchy. Bottom of the second page, he'll figure out a fingering at last. On the third page, do some work on it, get it in tune, and then play through from beginning to end, and then play through from beginning to end, and then play through from beginning to end. So when I first heard that, I was about 28 years old, and I had been brought up on the notion that only stupid people carry on playing when they make a mistake. And what you should do when you're practicing is stop and fix it. You mustn't just play. You mustn't just carry on. This was, the whole practice morality that I'd been raised on. So when I first heard this, I thought, what? Really? Play through from beginning to end and come what may? The whole thing being don't stop. Whatever happens, just play. And you notice and what's happening. Oh boy, did I miss that? Oh, that was terrible. I hope nobody was outside the door listening to that, etc. But you don't stop. And anyhow, I thought I'd give it a try. And at that age, I had never yet played the Mendelssohn Concerto. I skipped it as a student for some insane reason. I thought it was kind of one of the easier ones. And I wanted to play the Beethoven, I wanted to play the Brahms, I wanted to play the Paganini Concerto. And so I just didn't learn it. Didn't learn it as an undergraduate, didn't learn it as a postgraduate. And then I was about 28 and I was invited to play it. And I was invited in March to play it in August with Richard Hickox at the St. Endelian Festival. And so I said, sure, of course. So what's that? April, May, June, July. I had basically 4 months. And I decided all I am going to do is play through from beginning to end. I'm going to try this out. And do you know what? It was fantastic. It was certainly one of the best performances I'd given up to that date. And the feeling walking on stage was of having the whole piece as one, instead of the feeling of walking on stage having a whole collection of little bits that you try to fit together as you go, which is impossible because you practice this bit, you practice this bit, you practice this bit, and somehow you think you can stand up and just play. No, you have to practice that continuity and scope. So anyway, fantastic. And the whole thing is this spot cleaning clothes before you take them to the laundry. That's just brilliant. Because the thing is, you play through from beginning to end and do it again and again, and you end up sort of annoyed that you keep spoiling it at such and such a place because you're enjoying yourself playing. But then there's that bit where you mess it up every time. It spoils it. There's that other bit where you can hear it's the sound isn't what it could be. It's spoiling it. So after a while, you think, to hell with that. And you start working those passages. But even without that, you play through, and you suddenly realize that you've passed something that on previous playthroughs you screwed up every time. It's like, oh wow, I didn't even notice that bit. It's fixed itself. Absolutely marvelous. So anyhow, there are many ways you can do it, especially pretending you're on the concert stage, the orchestra's behind you, the audience are in front of you, and you just play through from beginning to end as if in a performance. But then number 250 in my book is what I call satellite practice. And this to me is the super duper highest octane practice you can do. And I call it satellite practice because, you know, if you play a really big concert, like you play in the London Proms, in the Royal Albert Hall, and the equivalent concerts in the States or wherever, these concerts are broadcast live on satellite. And you are playing to an audience of maybe 400 million people. And what you can imagine is people all around the world, they turn on their radio at a particular moment. Or they're driving in the car, they turn on their radio at a particular moment. And they turn on their television at a particular moment. And they hear you in that moment. Now, the question is, what do you want them to hear? So satellite practice means you don't play it through from beginning to end, but you take it a phrase at a time, or maybe a not too long passage at a time, and you pretend that you are in the heat of performance. You are right in there. You are playing live on satellite TV and radio and internet to an audience of 400 million people. So you play the phrase, whatever it is, whatever, I don't know. Now, is that what I want them to hear? Guess what? The answer is always no. Okay, well, what's the difference? Do it again, as though you're in the heat of performance. And that's the key thing, you see. When we practice and we're in a kind of cool mind and we're doing it intellectually or analytically or we're mechanically, it's not the same thing as when you're fired up for performance. Galamian, in that book that anybody serious about violin playing should know, Principles of Violin Playing and Teaching, he explains it very clearly. He says that a student practices a passage slowly, breaking it down into groups, practicing in rhythms and all kinds of fancy things. My words, not his. And then in performance, the passage still breaks down. Why is that? He asks. And he suggests that it's because after the technical practice, practicing in rhythms, speeding up with the metronome, whatever, which is done with a cool mind, what you have to then do is practice the same passage again as a musical performance. And then the muscles feel different. They work differently. Everything's different in the physicality of playing. So in satellite, excuse me, in satellite practice, the thing is to play as if you are in the heat of performance, not just repeating a phrase over and over, but this is it. This is my performance. When every second counts, every sound counts. Is that what I wanted? Again. Is that what I wanted? Again. And polishing it like that, boy, do you make incredible progress.
Mm-hmm.
As for practicing rhythms and things, when I was younger and had all the opportunities to play concertos and things, I used to practice in rhythms much too much. I admit it. Hands up. I surrender. I was wrong. I would practice in rhythms up until the day of the concert, and you have the rehearsal in the afternoon. Sometimes playing whatever it was in the afternoon was the first time I had actually played the music and played it continuously, because I'd even been practicing in rhythms in the morning. So I realized the error of my ways, and I imposed a 2-week ban on technical practice 2 weeks before a performance. 2 weeks before, you do not practice in rhythms. It's too late. You should have done it before anyway.
Mm.
And now you only practice as a musician. How do I want to play it? How do I want to hear it? Do you know the film, The Bridge Over the River Kwai? Did you see that?
I don't think so.
Famous, famous film director, David Lean. Well, when he died, I was in a hotel that evening. I just happened to turn on the television news at the exact moment that he began there's a little interview with him that they were showing because he just died and all. And I was so happy to catch it. I've learned so many things from turning on the television at random and just landing on something that's then really been important to me. Anyhow, this is one of them. And he was asked, was there a particular message that he was trying to get across in the films that he directed? What was he trying to achieve? And he said nothing at all. He said all he was trying to do was make the sort of movies that he would like to sit down and watch.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, wow, now isn't that what we're meant to be doing as performers? Is playing the music and the sound and the expression and the vibrato that we would like to hear and experience if we were sitting in the audience. So, in satellite practice, that's what you're asking yourself, is this what I want to hear if I'm sitting in the audience?
Mm-hmm. That's so well put. And so many wonderful concepts and everything that you just said. And things that really strike me is how it comes down to a couple of the things that you've mentioned already. It's how we're listening and the questions we're asking ourselves.
Listening is everything.
Mm-hmm.
I often say to students that if all I did all day long teaching was sit there and say, listen, no, listen, no, again, this time, listen. If that's all I said all day, I couldn't be doing better.
Mm.
Because again, you have to have the right kind of student to be able to work like that with them. But I'm constantly frustrated by a particular thing, which is that many of my most favorite technical complaints, for example, students not preparing fingers. You must prepare the underneath finger on the string before you lift a higher finger if you want a true legato. And Oh, I just go on at everyone all day long, every single student to, no, there, prepare the finger. And guess what? It's so much more legato when they do. And I'm constantly saying, you see, if if I went on and on and on about finger preparation to everybody as I do, and if it just made no difference, it's like, who cares if you prepare your fingers or not? It doesn't make any difference. Why does Simon keep going on about it? Well, that would be fine, and I shouldn't. But in every single case, the moment you prepare the finger, then the true legato is there. So, taking that as an example, you can explain to people about finger preparation. You can show them how to do it. I mean, frankly, I can talk for 20 straight minutes about finger preparation if you let me. But if somebody would just listen, then they don't prepare the finger and they don't like it because it's clearly not legato. There's a little click or a little bit of fuzz, so it's not pure and it's not beautiful legato. So they hear it and they think, oh. So they do it again. Ooh, they don't like that either. And they do it again. Oh, that's better. And then they do it again. Yes, that's that's the sound I want. And what they don't know is that before they weren't preparing their finger. And what they don't know is that now they are preparing their finger. So the question is, do they need to know if they would just listen? And the thing is that nearly everything I ever teach on a technical basis is something that actually, well, I tell you, I have a colleague, a Russian colleague, wonderful teacher of children, absolutely unbeatable. And she has said to me in the past with an outstretched finger, accusatory finger at me and saying, don't explain. If explain, student always unnatural. Student must just do. I said to her, this, you shouldn't say it to me only once. I said to her, yes, but some students can just do and other students can't. And if you explain to the ones who can't how to do something, and if they carry on doing it until it becomes an unconscious habit, then they end up in the same place as the student who could just do it in the first place without knowing how. But unfortunately, she always lost her command of English when she had to listen to a reply like that. So I never got anywhere with that. But it's what I firmly believe. But then every time I'm ever explaining, don't explain. Every time I'm explaining, I'm sort of feeling guilty that I shouldn't be. That I should be just urging them to listen and giving them, you know, scolding them for that sound. No, again, no, not clean, again. But I know why it's not clean. I want to tell them. Anyway, listening. It's everything. Dorothy DeLay said that to be a good teacher, you have to be a good listener. And that rules out a lot of musicians, he said to me.
Yes.
I mean, isn't that funny? I mean, wouldn't anyone think it's like if you're a painter, you know, what's really important is to look at the brush on the canvas to see what it's doing. I mean, can you imagine saying that? Can you imagine saying most painters aren't very good lookers? Ridiculous. But for her to say most or many, I can't honestly remember if she said most or many, but whichever it was, many musicians, that rules them out as teachers because they're not good listeners. Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you can just get to be a great listener so that not a single sound escapes you. What I like to say to people is, you know, the customer is always right. In the same way, the violin is always right. I mean, you can't put your fingers down all in one place and it comes out in tune. You can't sort of scrape the bow, but it comes out sounding pure. Every single sound that comes out of the violin is the perfect representation and result of what you just did to it. And it never lies to you. It always gives you the honest response. So what you have to do is be led by your ears, and there shouldn't be one sound that comes out of the instrument that you don't hear. You know, there's a rather unpleasant formula which says that a good violinist thinks they're rubbish until they hear themselves on a recording. Bad violinist thinks they're good until they hear themselves on a recording.
Oh, yeah.
You understand?
Oh. Simon, you've mentioned something that I love about satellite practicing. Before I let you go, would you please share with us maybe a tip on how to prepare for performing?
Well, as I said earlier, one of the really important things is not to practice practicing, but to practice performing. And, you know, there's an amazing thing, the 4 levels of learning. First stage is unconscious incompetence. Second stage,
Conscious incompetence.
correct. So in the first stage, you start off not knowing what's wrong.
Hmm.
Second stage, now you know what's wrong. Conscious incompetence.
Right.
Third stage, conscious competence.
Hmm.
You're getting it right now and you're doing it consciously. You know what you're meant to do and now you're doing it. Conscious competence.
Right.
But then the fourth stage is unconscious competence, where now you're not thinking about it. So I found this out, not for myself, thank God, though I find those being aware of those 4 stages, of course, very helpful because all you're aiming for is stage 4. But when I was teaching many years ago in a music college, which wasn't that high a standard, it wasn't the same as teaching at Guildhall, and the students had lots of problems with their playing, lots of work needing to be done, and preparing them for their exams. And there's this constant disappointment after the exams when you'd ask them, how did it go? And the common comment was, oh, I don't know what happened. It was terrible. You should have heard me the day before. It was fantastic. Don't know what happened on the day. Well, I finally figured out what it was. That what they were doing was getting their program to the level of conscious competence.
Hmm.
But it depended, the performance depending on conscious mental instruction. I must be careful here to do this. Here I've got to do this. Here I've got to remember to do. Here I mustn't do such and such. Here I must aim for. So you're doing a lot of thinking while you're playing, and you can kind of pull it off. But what happens when we're under stress, when we're under pressure, when we're on the concert stage? Um, it can be very difficult to think. Thinking slows down under pressure. And it can slow down so much that, in fact, you can't think anything at all. And if your performance relied on all of this sort of mental activity on your part, then of course you're going to fall flat on your face. What you have to do is get the preparation to the point where you can just play, and you don't really know, and you're just listening and you're in the music, etc. But stage 4, and you can practice particular passages for stage 4. It's like, well, here I've got to get that so that I can just think about something else and still pull it off really clean.
Hmm.
So anyway, that's one thing. But just to end on something, I don't know if you would know the name Donny Osmond. Have you ever heard of Donny Osmond?
Absolutely. Donnie and Sister Marie.
A few years ago, maybe 10 years ago, there's a documentary about Donny Osmond on television. And, you know, I don't care if it's not my kind of music. The guy's a musician and he's lived in the music world and I'm interested. So I love watching a documentary about a musician. So in the middle of this documentary, I learned the most amazing thing. which was, I didn't know that Donny Osmond suffered for years and years from chronic stage fright.
Mm.
And, you don't imagine these guys going out on stage and, doing all that stuff you do in a pop concert. You don't think of them being nervous. Well, of course they can be nervous. In fact, I just watched a documentary about ABBA, and they were talking about being nervous at concerts and things, of course. So anyway, Donny Osmond suffered from paralytic, debilitating stage fright for years. And one day, just before a concert, he was in the dressing room having a panic attack. He's just about to walk out on stage in front of 20,000 people. He's sitting there having a panic attack. And his wife said to him, "Look, why don't you just do yourself and all the rest of us a favor and go out there and give a mediocre performance?" So he went out and gave the best performance of his life.
Mm-hmm.
Because the whole stage fright thing comes from, in his case, he thought he had to be better than any other singer out there, all at the same time. We stand up and play the violin. We think we've got to be as good as Oistrakh and Pellman and Vengerov and all at the same time. And it's effort defeats. This is the amazing thing. In the physical world, effort rewards. In the mental and emotional worlds, effort defeats. So to just stand there and not try so hard,
Yes.
suddenly you're free. So one great tip for, who was it? Heifetz said, practice as though your life depends on it. Perform as though you don't give a damn.
I think so, yes.
I only found that quote a couple of years ago. It's like, wow, there it is again. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Tim Gallwey, who's the author of the Inner Game of Tennis and Inner Game of Golf books, calls it effortless effort.
Effortless effort. Very nice.
Where you put in the effort to play, but without the intensity of wanting to do it perfectly.
Do you know the tennis player Tim Henman?
No.
Well, you probably wouldn't. He was the darling of the British for years and years. Until Andy Murray came along, we hadn't had a winner at Wimbledon for 75 years or something. And Tim Henman was a great tennis star, but he never ended up winning the big tournaments. He'd always get in his own way, and in the quarterfinal or semi-final, he'd be playing fantastic tennis and masterful shots, and then comes to the big moment and he hits it out of the court, hits it into the net, and everyone's disappointed. And oh well, there goes another year when we didn't win Wimbledon. And John McEnroe provides the most incredibly interesting commentary of tennis matches at Wimbledon. And he was commentating on a match with Henman and I think Michael Stich, I don't know how to pronounce his name. And previous to this, Henman had been in incredibly fine form, and now, he couldn't get the ball over the net. And McEnroe said the most fantastic thing. And as he began, I reached for the pen and paper and quickly wrote down what he said, and I've been referring people to it ever since. He said, the trouble with Henman is that he's trying too hard. What he should do is just run to the ball and remember what it feels like to enjoy hitting it and not care so much about the result. And that, to use the popular phrase, blew my mind. I mean, to start not caring about the result, wow. When you're going for that shift, you care about the result. In the moment of caring about it, you don't listen, and instead you just do it. And guess what? The shift isn't as you wanted it. But what about if you're enjoying playing and you just you don't care about the result because you just go da ya, and you sing it out of tune as I just did. But no, you hit it effortlessly. But there he was, not enjoying hitting the ball. We've got to enjoy playing the violin. It's the first thing. If we want to be any good, we enjoy the feeling of it. We enjoy everything about it. So there's some tips for performance. Don't try to be so great. Don't care about the results. Enjoy yourself. Um, if only it were that easy. But that follows on from all the intelligent hard work and preparation that we put in beforehand.
Simon, this is incredible advice.
Thank you very much. I'm trying to live it myself.
And I want to thank you for this gift of your time and your insight. And I am so much looking forward to either attending one of your events in America or maybe traveling to England and having the chance to meet you in person.
Oh, yes, we must. Love to. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed this conversation with Simon Fischer. Personally, I feel like this is one that I'll want to listen to and refer to again and again. As Simon says, practicing is self-teaching. So I hope this episode will be a source of inspiration for all of us to be even more present, thoughtful, deliberate, and deeply interested in our work. I'd love to know what your favorite takeaways from today's conversation were, so please get in touch with me. I am Mind Over Finger on both Instagram and Facebook. Now I'd like to invite you to join me for the Performance Makeover Masterclass, a special 3-part free live training on all things practicing and performing. Together, we're going to explore the mindsets that can boost your practice into hyperdrive and the methods that lead to optimal performance. So I hope you join me live on April 20th, 21st, and 22nd at 11 a.m. Central, 12 p.m. Eastern, and bring your questions and thoughts on building a super effective practice and performance preparation regimen. I'll have all the information and the sign-up details for you in the show notes and at mindoverfinger.com. I can't wait to discuss optimal performance with you. So that's it for today. I hope you and yours stay safe and healthy. Again, thank you, and à bientôt.